Welcome to episode 251 of the Brainy Business, Understanding the Psychology of Why People Buy. In today's episode, I'm excited to introduce you to Dr. Mike Rucker, author of the new book, The Fun Habit. Ready? Let's get started.
You are listening to the Brainy Business Podcast, where we dig into the psychology of why people buy and help you incorporate behavioral economics into your business, making it more brain-friendly. Now here's your host, Melina Palmer.
Hello, everyone. My name is Melina Palmer, and I want to welcome you to the Brainy Business Podcast. In today's conversation, I'm joined by Dr. Mike Rucker, author of the brand new book, The Fun Habit, which just came out a couple days ago on January 3rd, 2023. Mike is an organizational psychologist and charter member of the International Positive Psychology Association, whose work has been published in the International Journal of Workplace Health Management and Nutrition Research. His ideas about fun and health have been featured in the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, Fast Company, the Telegraph, Psychology Today, Forbes, Vox, Thrive Global, Mindbodygreen, and more. He was named one of 10 digital changemakers by the Healthcare Information and Management Systems Society and currently serves as a senior leader at Active Wellness. And not surprisingly, he's a lot of fun. And today's conversation is all about fun. We also talk about framing and word choice and how fun and change really do go together, we promise. It's a great chat that I can't wait to share with you. I won't make you wait much longer before we get into that conversation. Just want to be sure you know that there are links in the show notes for everything, including Mike's book and contact information and related past episodes. It's all in the app you're listening to and at thebrainybusiness.com/251. Now let's jump right in. Dr. Mike Rucker, welcome to the Brainy Business Podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to talk about fun today and habits, and what better way to kick off the year than that, really, for anything. I think any day is better with a little bit of fun. Before we get into the meat of the fun, it's weird, but before we get into all that, how about you share a little bit about yourself and your background for everyone who's not yet familiar with you?
Yeah, so by academic trade, I'm an organizational psychologist. Since getting my PhD, I've focused more on behavioral science. And I have a book coming out called The Fun Habit, which is essentially looking at living a life more joyfully through the active pursuit of the activities you engage in, rather than pursuing happiness as kind of an ideal.
Yeah, dig in on that a little bit more, right? What does that mean to you? What should that mean to the listener? And knowing that this episode is scheduled to come out right after, so the book came out, 3 days ago into the future of when this happens. But, this is the time of year where people are thinking about, what they're going to be wanting for the rest of the year, kind of reflecting on the year before and looking forward. So when you talk about that pursuit of happiness, as an ideal and whatnot, what does all that mean?
Yeah. So, for quite a long time, I was kind of a grinded out entrepreneur, and then, kind of evolved into a grinded out entrepreneur for the company that I still am associated with. But I've also been a purveyor of the quantified self movement and also a charter member of the International Positive Psychology Association. So I've always been kind of fascinated, I guess, by what now is commonly referred to as life hacks. And so for a long time, I usually generally talk about the period of 2009 to 2016. I'd really optimized my life for, living a joyful life and trying to extrapolate as much happiness as I could. Obviously, also, fitness and success, and all of that was going fairly well. I would show up to Quantified Self conferences and talk about those types of things. And I was working for a fitness company and, really trying to help others sort of lift themselves with regards to fitness too. And I felt like I was fairly happy. I was using the tools of positive psychology fairly effectively. And all of that was going great until 2016, when a few unfortunate events happened. I lost my brother quite suddenly to a pulmonary embolism. And then also, again, being this purveyor of fitness, I was also kind of an amateur fitness enthusiast. I had done a couple Ironmans and a couple half Ironmans. I found out quite suddenly. There wasn't like this onset. It was essentially I did run my fastest half marathon. And then a few weeks later found out I had advanced osteoarthritis, and wouldn't be able to run again. That essentially I had no more cartilage, and I was a candidate for a hip replacement. And at such a young age, it meant, that I essentially had to give up running, anything that, sort of put a lot of impact on the hip. And so I was like, okay, well, I've faced challenges before, I'll figure this one out. And I essentially tried to continue to pursue happiness as aggressively as I had in the past. And paradoxically, really quickly, I found out that the more I tried to chase happiness, it was making me a lot more unhappy. And I wanted to figure out why, because it was this downward spiral and it was leading to some pretty negative consequences. And so I just finished my doctoral work, and like a good academic, I went into the research to try and sort out why this was happening. And I don't know if this is serendipitous or not, but there was this emerging research coming out of University of California at Berkeley and some other places. A professor that I really like her work in this area is Dr. Iris Mouse, had identified that folks, especially in Western cultures, that were overly concerned with happiness. So not necessarily valuing wanting to be happy or wanting others to flourish or, wanting to support each other, but people that were like, I want to be happy. Those types of people were actually some of the most unhappy, to the point that there was a fairly direct line to a lot of mental illness. Like, you can kind of overthink this and it can lead to weird outcomes, even mental illness like depression and things of that nature. And so if these tools of happiness that were, working for me so well were no longer functioning, what was left, right? And so what I found is that, it's essentially a tool of mindfulness, but that if we take an action-oriented approach to not necessarily trying to be happy, but use our time to invite joy and delight by doing things that we really enjoy, whatever that is, reconnecting with a hobby, making sure that we're hanging out with friends, doing things that we do feel a connection to that light us up. Over time, indexing those opportunities to do joyful things ultimately gets you out of that rut. And so, in short, just not a lot of us, especially those that, are really A-type hard driving, don't realize that we've relinquished a lot of control because we're really letting outside influences, take control over our time rather than spending our time deliberately.
Yeah. This is coming out so last week's episode will have been a conversation with Ayelet Fishback and Cassie Holmes. So Ayelet's book is called Get It Done. She's at the University of Chicago. And then Cassie's book is called Happier Hour.
And Cassie's work is ingrained into mine. The vacation mindset, these are all amazing tools. So that's great.
Awesome. Yeah. And yay. Okay, good. And so, very much kind of, stacking these up in a way that's going to line up for everybody, a theme of this time of the year. Did
Walbach talk about Caitlin Woolley? Because she's another one that I really admire, and they've done a lot of research together.
No, not really. Tell more about that work. Yeah.
So one of her colleagues, that I think she's co-authored like 3 papers together. Caitlin Woolley, I really admire her work, and she specifically uses the word fun, which obviously I'm like, yeah, okay, let's take ownership. But she's shown how, so one of the tools that I talk about in the book is activity bundling, and she's shown how we can have more longevity with certain tasks if we just add a component that makes it pleasurable for us. So many of us do mundane things, and with just a little bit of creativity, we can reframe them, either by remembering why we're doing those, so it becomes pleasurable, like as okay, I'm doing this, but it's going to be good. Or, let's say something like that doesn't take a lot of cognitive load, like domestic work. Can I pair it with, a podcast I really enjoy, like yours, or, music that I really enjoy, and make it more fun by proxy, by bundling activities. So,
yep. Yeah, I had already pre-chosen that So every Tuesday is a refresh episode from the back catalog of the podcast. And then there's a new episode on Fridays. And so I have an episode about temptation bundling, talking about Katie Milkman's research that I said, that's going to be our good Tuesday. So very much integrated for everyone who wants to check those out. Lots of good stuff here. And so I think it is, I think word choice is so important. We were talking about this a little bit before we started recording. We're definitely going to talk about it here on the episode. Like, I don't like to say people who are overachiever, right? I feel like, I'm just an achiever. I don't need to be over anything. What's that about? But like you said, and I think there are a lot of achievers who listen to the show, right? As we're looking at whether it's entrepreneur, intrapreneur, academic, striving for greatness and happiness and being, the happiest we can be on that, whether it's a Likert scale or whatever, we're judging ourselves all the time. And so I really like where you're saying though, that pursuit of happiness when you're in the, make it too myopic. You're just so focused on the little things and not looking out on what you're trying to, the full journey and having the enjoyment in those moments. What sort of, knowing, of course, read the book as far as some insights to share here, but, what's some high level stuff that you can share about helping to get out of the chase of happiness in that way?
So I think the mental frame, there's a couple, use the one that works for you. One is happiness is really an exercise in evaluation, right? So how can you evaluate less? Because that's a poor use of time, right? And how can you refocus your kind of thought there to an action bias where you're like, okay, it doesn't necessarily matter where I'm at. I have control in this moment to be present where my feet are and enjoy the time that I have. Because ultimately, instead of our brains being as cause and effect as we thought, we really now understand, and this is especially over the last 10 years, that it's more of a predictive engine, right? And so if we take control over how we spend our time and we bias it towards fun things, ultimately we're going to start to perceive the world in a more positive light and in a more optimistic light. Research that I really like, it's actually one of Cassie's colleagues. It comes from Colin West. He co-wrote the vacation study with her. And he talks a lot about, this sense of control. Like when we talk about, did Cassie talk about time affluence and time poverty?
Yeah.
So, that's an essential component of my work too. How can we perceive ourselves as more time affluent? And the way we do that is really regain our agency and autonomy and figure out how we can have control over our time. And once we do that, one of the exercises that I suggest is taking a time audit and really seeing if the activities in, like let's say the context of 168 hours in your week are things that you find enjoyable. And through that lens, right? Because so many of us, especially, I know I'm speaking to entrepreneurs and I speak that language because I was one. We've so taught ourselves to be critical of our calendars for productivity, but we haven't thought about, does the time that we spend make us happy, bring us joy? And so looking at that and trying to figure out, okay, I have my routine, but how can I adjust this to integrate things that make me feel good about the way I'm spending my time becomes important. And a whole host of empirical research now suggests that there's a host of reasons that we should do that, right? Especially for people that are high achievers. One, we need renewal, right? If we're working out, if we're working till the end of the day, generally our work falls off a cliff, right? I'm sure you've had episodes about busy versus work, right? And so,
I've talked about it, but not probably like dedicated. So of course, definitely feel free to build on it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, in the literature, it's often called admin work. It's generally things that we think we're doing, like, hey, I feel good because I'm working 60 hours a week. But if you critically look at that work, it should either be outsourced because it's a terrible ROI on your time, or it shouldn't be done at all, right? You're essentially like reading emails from newsletters that you don't need to, but because it feels like an extension of work, you're like, oh, well, I'm grinding it out. And so the important thing here, especially for folks that are time poor, is to realize that if you don't take time off the table for yourself, you're not showing up as the best version of yourself. And so like a simple math equation can explain it, that if you're only working 40 hours a week and saving time for renewal, if that gives you the capacity to kind of have a 2x output versus the person that thinks they're working hard because they're working 60 hours a week, but by simple math, we know they're only producing 1 unit of output. So the person that is working 40 hours a week, is getting 80 hours worth of output, and the person that's working 60 is getting 20 units less. And they're also not having a lot of fun, right? So that person that's working 40, it's actually an upward spiral because they can now use that 20 hours for things that are not connected to work that we now know kind of, increases your vitality because you feel like you have a life outside of this other thing. And so that's why it becomes extremely important. Again, in the literature, it's called leisure. And unfortunately, people that are really stretched thin kind of fall victim to things that we call passive leisure, like plopping down on the couch and watching shows they don't care about, right? Or doom scrolling social media, or, just doing things out of convenience, but that, they're really just doing to pass the time so they can go to sleep. Where if you make that space and kind of create psychological safe space in your schedule for doing things that you want, you can add in active leisure, these things that require a little bit more energy to kind of get started. But we know that people that engage in these long term, they're actually additive with regards to your vitality, right? Like, because you're doing your work day, then you're getting to do things that you really like. And then you kind of sleep well because you're living this, balanced is kind of a loaded word nowadays, but, at least a life that's a rich mosaic of things that are interesting to you. Because another sort of rich point with regards to all of this science is we know when our lives are overly habituated and we're always just kind of doing the same stuff, we store those memories as single units. So when we look back at our life, this kind of might be lost when you're younger, but it's certainly important. I can tell you because I just turned 50. You start to look back at what your legacy looks like, right? And if it was just one long, sort of boring list of details that were routine, time and time again, we tend to think about those as one thing. But when we encode, again, kind of a rich blend of interesting things and, that are like through spontaneity and curiosity, and different relationships with interesting people, we can think of all of those things, one after the other. And it makes life more interesting.
Yeah. Well, I love all of that. And then as you were talking, I think the closest related so I have an episode on bike shedding that I'll be putting in the show notes, which then I talk about it as the productive procrastination piece, right? All the things that feel so important that we have to do, but it's really just distraction. And it definitely talks about the urgent versus important scale, like you said, busy versus work. So I'll link to that for everyone who wants to learn a little bit more about those aspects. So one of the things that I thought was really interesting and, comes in early in the book is that, as someone who really enjoys fun, and I like to have fun, even as an adult, even when we're adulting, right? And I have, fun with the kids and fun at work and all the things. But you say that that's not the norm, that a lot of people don't keep that funness.
Yeah.
So can you talk about that?
Well, it's funny because I think there's a selection bias with regards to podcasters because you're doing something that you're clearly having fun. I can tell by the big smile that you have. And usually that requires being deliberate about your calendar so that you can organize a life that you have, time to be able to do this. And so, but the general population, what we know is, most people live this habituated life that they've kind of, you submit to the sort of routines and rhythms. And then, that becomes comfortable, but you forget that, you can have a little bit of time for yourself. And so, especially folks that have, are working and also have the burden of domestic duties, like a lot of times they just let all of that stuff crowd them out. And the reasons for that are complex. And, for some, it's going to be one thing and for some, it's going to be the other. But the underpinnings are certainly that the Puritan work ethic is still alive and well, right? There's the other that hustle culture suggests that there's some sort of trophy that you get for the hustle. Although I think what's really great is post-pandemic, you're seeing even the folks that championed it, like Gary Vee, come out and say, whoa, I need to course correct this. Like, you look at what someone like him puts out, the tenor has completely changed, right? And then I think that, the small silver lining from the pandemic is a lot of us kind of did get displaced. I know we're going to get into change a little bit, and you talk about, change on the podcast, but one of the benefits of that type of disruption is you're like, holy cow, like, is this the life that I want to lead? Because we were able to be more mindful of kind of the rhythms and the, traditions and the things that we had habituated in our life. And as people went to go put that back together, it is neat. There's sort of this, mild awakening of people. I don't want, maybe because we saw folks face their mortality, if they got really sick, or just, again, because disruption is a great opportunity for change. I do believe that you're seeing people decide that they want to live life more joyfully, instead of just sort of, waiting for that prize at the end of the finish line.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, really, like, seeking out fun it shouldn't be that hard, right? We should know things that make us happy, but maybe we don't. And we've lost some of that, over the years. So, what advice do you have for people to start discovering what is fun for them? Because just like happiness, just like anything else, fun isn't the same for everyone, and fun's not the same in every situation. And, can we have fun even when we're being serious? And like, what's the balance? How do we, kind of look to curate that life?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, the initial step, if you really are struggling to, I don't even know what I would do, is to sit down and just kind of brainstorm, right? Approach it with a lot of curiosity and have fun with that. Like, don't make it an assignment, but just kind of, and you could either, there's two ways to do it. Some people benefit from having a time constraint because they, it forces it out of their head. Others, maybe if you love to explore and kind of think, figure out what that is. And so it can be everything from what were the hobbies, when you did have more time, a little bit more time affluence that have kind of gotten, architected out of your life that would be cool if you reconnected. What are things that you authentically feel connected to? Because a lot of times when people do this exercise, it will sort of be, acts of fear of missing out. And it's like, was that an external sort of influence, or is that something that, you really want to do? And it could be the latter. So make sure you put that down. And then just things that you've wanted to do, right? A lot of us long to do things, and we could do them if we were a little bit more deliberate about it. So that should get you a good list. And then you want to pare it down to about 8 to 15 so that it is actionable. And hopefully, a few things that that you could do without, too much trouble. And then also I suggest some things that are pro-social. So whether that's to make sure that you're connecting with, folks in your life that were fun, that, maybe you haven't seen in a while because of, domestic duties, or, just because life's gotten too busy, to pairing fun with kindness and seeing if there are opportunities to volunteer. People that put those types of events together know that fun attracts people. And so, if you're just deliberate and look to see like, what are those types of opportunities to connect with something bigger than yourself, but also a lot of fun people, that can be a great thing for your list. An important second step is to make sure that it's not an exercise of just adding things on to your already busy life. So what I suggest is, in some form or fashion, doing a time audit. In the book, I suggest, just looking at your previous 168 hours, because that's a pretty easy thing to do. Now, I know that's a paradox because anything termed audit is, by definition, not fun, but it's just an important step because I think so many of us think that we mindfully, spend our time. But if you look at it critically, you see that there are things where you're spending your time in ways that you probably didn't want to. So I have this simple model called the PLAY model. It stands for pleasing, living, agonizing, and yielding. And it's essentially looking for the opportunities in your life where you can have fun, but they don't take a lot of energy. This research comes from Daniel Gilbert and Matt Killingsworth, where we just know that if those are integrated in your life, the ratio doesn't really matter, but just making sure that some of that happens within your week that you at least feel satisfied. You at least feel like there's a reason to live, right? Because you're deriving some pleasure from your activities. And so, trying to identify what those are and if there are opportunities to increase them. The living quadrant is really those like big things that allow us to grow, right? That are like take a lot of energy. We can't do all the time. But we still want to identify what those opportunities mean for us in our life so that we're stretching ourselves a little bit. We're getting, we're understanding who we are. We're expressing our identity. That can be a connection to spirituality. That can be a connection to nature, like, a big hike that, connects you to, wondrous sort of views of nature. Or, for a lot of folks, it's connecting to a long lost hobby or engaging in that hobby and leading to a path of mastery. But the more important part of that model is the yielding and agonizing. So yielding tends to be things where we just passively spend our time because we're just so kind of burnt out that we don't know anybody, or it's become habitual behavior that without the mindful look at our schedule, we do without thinking. So that could be like social media use. It could be, again, not necessarily watching a show that you like where you get super excited when it comes on, but if you're just kind of plopping down and turning anything on because you're just so, burnt out you think that's a good use of your time. It could be relationships of convenience, those types of things. Those things are low hanging fruit to kind of go, you know what? Okay, I'm just going to sort of playfully see how I can swap out this activity and do something that lights me up more. For entrepreneurs, it can be admin tasks, right? Again, kind of that busy work. That's where I see specifically entrepreneurs go, wow, now that I think about it, that's not something I need to be doing. I just did because I didn't really think about it critically. And then agonizing is that interesting thing where a lot of these things we need to do, right? And so there's a couple of ways to approach creating space, within activities that fall in that category. One is, can they be outsourced? Because a lot of times just a little bit of creativity they can, and, doesn't necessarily require a lot of resources. So I give a bunch of examples of that in the book. Or is it something where you can pair it with something that is fun to change the tenor of that particular activity? And so summarizing all of that, it would be, how first do you create space in your schedule? And then once you have that, using the list that you made, how can you integrate things that are more fun into your life?
Yeah. So you were talking about, changing the tenor of something. So there are some tasks that we still have to do that are not fun, but there might be a way to make them more fun. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah. So for instance, let's say meetings have become agonizing, right? Like, is there a way to change the environment? Like if you guys go outside, does it just make it more pleasurable? These things don't need to be profound, right? It's essentially just taking things where you're dreading them and trying to couple them with that or change them in some way that makes them more interesting, right? Like if you are in a profession where you need to grind through a ton of different emails, can you turn that, kind of gamify it so that ultimately you're going to bring up Miltman's work of habit bundling? Is there a way to make the reward after that so fun that the whole, engagement seems a lot more fun than it was when you just did it to kind of get through it? And so there are a whole host of different strategies, but a lot of times I think the biggest impact is there any way to just change it so that it's better? And then if not, is there a way to, add something on, either by changing up the people that you work with, changing up the environment, or changing the way that you do the task?
Yeah. When I was just out of college from my undergrad, I started working at an advertising agency, which advertising agencies are pretty good about incorporating fun at work. But one of the things I really liked that they did at this particular agency is, so every Monday we had the, Monday morning staff meeting sort of thing is what you have anywhere else, right? But in this case, it was, talking about projects that are coming up, who's got a pitch, who's working on this, you have all that stuff you're having to talk about. But we also did something that it was a game that was called Bucks and Quarters. And so you go around and you get to tell the story of what you'd done over the weekend, like what's one really cool thing, and then giving kudos to someone else for something great that they had done in the week before. And so you could give $1 to someone who did something really amazing the week before. And then by doing the thing with the quarter, whoever had the best story of the weekend would get the quarter, right? Was this sort of silly thing. But that also is, so all the chatter that would happen during the Monday, especially like, what'd you do this weekend? You get all out at one time. So you're reducing a lot of extra water cooler chat. But because everyone's together, you get to hear everyone's stories and everyone's laughing together, and you get to have bonds with people that you wouldn't even realize, like, oh, they like camping, I like camping, or, whatever, or some concert they went to or whatever it was. So I think that was a really fun way to both reduce excess chatter and idle time at work and help everybody to have a little bit of fun.
Yeah. And I think probably it was predicated on psychological safety of the group, right? I think when we talk about fun at work, for any leader that's kind of listening to us, the hard work is, I'm sure that the person that was organizing that made sure that they were listening to all of you so that they were creating a safe space where you guys could all share and wanted to share, right? And so that, I think it's always important to note that when you hear about fun interventions, and certainly there are a lot of them and they're successful, but you need to start to make sure that everyone feels like they can come in and enjoy that particular activity. That's where fun at work is a challenge, but it's, I think, a fun challenge that leaders should step up to, but they need to make sure that they're kind of setting the example, because so often employees do model the leadership behavior, whether we like that or not.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to link to the episode on vulnerability loops to help with that insight into, you got to be open before, and know that, the trust will come. If you're open, others will be open around you. So I know that when I had reached out and was giving you some questions and thoughts in advance, so I have a chapter in my book, What Your Employees Need and Can't Tell You, that's called Where's the Fun? Right. So, as we're looking at change and bringing all of this in, helping people to be better in the way they think about change at work, and big and small, all those things. And so, of course, you have a chapter that's dedicated to this in the workspace as well as on an individual space. And so I would just love to talk about fun and change at work, and I'll let you, take that ball here and run with it.
Yeah, I think, I love this question. I definitely want to explore it with you, because I think, change is interesting from the context of my academic background. We really looked for some sort of disruption, right? Because we know, whether it's the Lewin change model or McKinsey 7 or, whatever you're kind of use as a device to sort of orchestrate change within the workplace, it's kind of developed around chaos, right? And so I think fun could be an interesting tool within the realm of those interventions to get people to buy in, because ultimately that's usually the crux of most intervention with regards to adoption of change. And where I think it could be helpful is, one, fun generally in the workplace unites you around a common goal, right? Because if you guys are enjoying your time together, generally that cohesion comes from wanting to accomplish something together. And so figuring out, especially if it's something that's uncomfortable, which generally change is, how could you use fun as an instrument to get people to ultimately the destination you're hoping? So as you're architecting whatever that change looks like, what kind of elements of fun can you integrate into that so that you're actually attracting people to it, right? We now know that, system one thinking, whatever that is, if we can get people towards that, where it's a little bit more comfortable, generally people naturally sort of go there. And so I think that's where it could be a helpful instrument within change management. But I would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah. So, for one, my framework for change is called It's Not About the Cookie. So that's definitely got a fun aspect to it, I guess, instead of, being stodgy, I suppose. So with it, when I look at change, I focus on, so I think that one of the big problems that you get with change at work, especially, and when we think about change, is one, we've been told that change is hard and that it's always hard and that it has to be hard. It's going to get people to change. It's a hard thing to do. But I say reframing that to say, well, like, does it have to be? Because we change all the time and we might not realize it. We change for things we want to do effortlessly often. So it doesn't have to be that difficult, for one. And then another thing that I think is wrong in the approach that most end up taking, and it's what our brains think we need to do, is that when we think about changes at work, we think they're only the big things, right? So a change is a merger, is a CEO retiring, is a rebrand. It's something that requires a project management team, and everything else isn't important enough to consider because people should be able to figure that all out, right? But because our brains work in micro moments and micro decisions, we really need to be looking at the little things and be either, building them. I talk about it being snowflakes that are either helping to build a snowball of change, or if you ignore them for too long, you've like created an icy tundra of nightmares that makes it so change can be really, really difficult if you're trying to overcome that. So if you look at all the little moments that you can be building toward change and thinking about so you don't have too much change at any given time, and that you're not saying, well, we're doing all this and let's go ahead and throw in that new process too, and think it's not going to make a big difference, because it can absolutely make it so people aren't ready to be receptive for the really important change because you just threw something in.
No, I think you're spot on. I mean, that's essentially in line, right, with my ad hoc answer. And that is that all the tools that we learn in organizational psychology, and, all of my, fellow colleagues graduated on, most of them, to be consultants, are using these models that essentially are like, hey, these things always have jagged edges, right? And like, let's use that because the chaos, means that we can put things together. I essentially use COVID as a metaphor for that, right? And so I think these things are effective. But I really like your reframe, and I essentially buy into it, right? Like, does it have to be that we're making everyone feel so uncomfortable that it's essentially like a divorce or, some sort of substantial loss, like, hey, life is miserable? Like, there's got to be a better way, right? Especially if you have employee buy-in. And so I love your approach to that. And I certainly would think that, some of the tools that I put forth would help augment that, in the sense that if people are like, hey, this is just better because, my life's better. And you explain in the way that, the way that you do things are just going to feel a lot more natural, then you would get a better result, right? It kind of pairs well with the buying component that's pretty important with change management.
Yeah, for sure. I actually use the same framework for pricing strategy as I do for change management, because of exactly what you're saying, that even if you're not exchanging money, in that, you need someone to buy in on whatever idea you're selling them. So, all the same tactics really kind of come into play there. So with fun at work too, I know, and something else that, Cassie talked about, and I'm not sure who did the original research on this, but, finding that people who have a best friend at work are more loyal, they're happier, they're more engaged, they're better employees for companies. And so helping to incorporate that fun and for people to connect is definitely valuable.
Yeah. I'm familiar with that research. And I think that's absolutely right. Like, who are those colleagues? And then I don't believe this comes from the study, but what I've found, sort of adjacent, is that how do you create those fun opportunities outside of the department of the employee? And so for bigger organizations, sometimes that can be affinity groups. And what I mean by that is like shared interests. Sheryl Sandberg certainly did a good job with that, with a specific group. But it's important that you allow that cross-pollination, because oftentimes there's a power dynamic, within a department. So because of those social norms, it's really hard for someone to let their guard down enough that they really can enjoy themselves. But two folks that work in a different department, especially if they're kind of at they feel like they're at an equal footing, there's not too much skin in the game professionally. And so they can, again, sort of connect around this shared thing that they enjoy. A lot of times that kind of nonlinear thinking that two people from different departments have can actually lead to a better outcome from the company, but it's certainly a lot more fun. And so in my chapter about work and fun, I think you have to have an empathetic eye, because we all all so different. But to be able to create opportunities for folks where you're going to have a lot of different points of view, so especially within a big organization, be able to self-select into things that they do find fun is a great recipe to sort of, make sure that you're holding up that ideal within your workplace. Where it's the opposite is when you force fun, right? I think it's a very timely, it will still only be a month or two old by the time this podcast comes out. But, there was a lot of talk last week about that French consultant that essentially sued his company because the company had claimed that they had a fun culture, but their ideology of fun was, going out and drinking after work. And he was saying, look, it's not how, essentially that's more work for me and I'm not a drinker. And he got fired for essentially sharing those views. And the French court sided with him because they're like, that isn't fun. That's, again, essentially just make this company extending work. And so you can use that as an example that fun in the workplace, you can either empower the individual to have more fun so that they have more vitality when they come back to the office, or you can, create it from an empathetic standpoint where it is more inclusive and you're creating these opportunities for organic fun, or you're allowing folks to self-select, like, again, is it a walk-in meeting? Is it, creating a safe space where you're kind of gamifying a specific task? This works especially well with creative tasks because when people feel like they can break eggs, like it's okay if they fail, so they can try multiple things and they can think in a nonlinear fashion without judgment. That's when you get some of the most innovative creative ideas. So all of these are suggestions for creating a more fun workspace.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's all so important. And, we need to understand that fun's not the same to everyone, but like you said, forced fun and the, mandatory happy hours, virtual or otherwise, are not fun.
Yeah.
The world has voted that's not fun.
That's exactly right.
And even it can be simple stuff that you start with too. I know in the chapter I have on this, I talk about, the difference between putting things where you say it's very strict, like do this and then do this. And this is how we're going to be creative in the meeting and write everything down on these legal notepads. And you're going to make an orderly list of stuff versus doing a bunch of colorful Post-its and colored pens that you're using for that task and being able to have more space to move around and whatnot. Even something that simple can help it to be a little bit more fun and make ideas better, stronger ones.
Well, and what you're describing is you're allowing folks to flex their autonomy, right? So this comes from transactional analysis. And so I'm sort of borrowing from a discipline, but you're exactly right. We know that when we get in this role where someone has prescribed work activities to us, it's almost impossible for it to be fun because even if we're enjoying sort of the experience, we're now in this mode of like, okay, I need to do A, B, C, and D. And if you can if the outcome of whatever you're trying to do can still be the same, but allow people to do it in a way that feels comfortable for them, you're going to have more fun every time.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. Well, we could have fun talking about fun all day, but sadly, our time is coming to a close here. And so I will, of course, be linking to your new book, The Fun Habit, in the show notes for everyone to go check that out and get their copy. And in addition to that, what's the best way to learn more from you, to connect, for people to share their fun ideas, any of that?
Yeah. And I'm here for the dialogue. I love it because there is a lot to unpack. So, and I appreciate that opportunity to share that. My website is michaelrucker.com. I have, a lot of posts about the science of fun. And it's a great way to kind of connect with me further, either through social media or you can contact me through the website as well.
Fantastic. Well, we will be linking to that and finding lots of ways to have all sorts of fun. So I wish you a very fun rest of your day.
You too. Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you again to Dr. Mike Rucker for joining me on the show today. What got your brain buzzing in today's conversation? For me, it probably isn't too surprising to know that I love being able to make all work and life a little or a lot more fun. Who said learning has to be boring? Who decided change had to be hard? Who gets to force everyone's life to be difficult or for business to be stone-faced and abrasive? It doesn't have to be this way. There's so much research coming out now showing the benefits of fun. When we have fun, we're healthier and happier and more engaged at work and have better relationships and time at home. It's so worth it. And we're a species that's meant to have fun. We don't have to have fun and be ecstatically happy every minute of every day. We weren't built for that either. But we should take the time and make the effort to bring fun back into our lives. What about you? What can you do right now to have more fun today? What's something you think is really fun that you don't do anymore? When did you stop doing it? Why'd you stop doing it? How can you add it back into your life? It doesn't have to be daily. Maybe it's a one-time thing or something you do once a month or every quarter. But what's fun for you? What will you do now to bring it back or amplify it or savor it if you're already doing it some, but not as much as you would like? Whatever it is, I'd love to hear about it. Come share it with me on social media. You can find me as The Brainy Biz pretty much everywhere. And be sure to tag Mike too. He is Perform Better on Twitter, and I'm linking to both of those handles in the show notes. Feel free to add some fun in there. Maybe a GIF or an emoji, a pun, or anything else that floats your boat. We can't wait to see what you've got in store for us. And of course, those Twitter handles are, as I said, in the show notes for the episode, along with your links to get your copy of Mike's new book, The Fun Habit, as well as how to get in contact and follow him, related past episodes, and so much more. It's all waiting there for you in the app you're listening to and at thebrainybusiness.com/251. And thank you again to Dr. Mike Rucker for joining me on the show today. It was a delight to chat with and learn from you. Join me Tuesday for another brainy episode of the Brainy Business Podcast. It's going to be a lot of fun. You won't want to miss it. Until then, thanks again for listening and learning with me. And remember to be thoughtful.
Thank you for listening to the Brainy Business Podcast. Melina offers virtual strategy sessions, workshops, and other services to help businesses be more brain-friendly. For more free resources, visit thebrainybusiness.com.